So the number one risk right now, gripping the entire world, is the food or inflation, or rather the food or cost of living crisis. And what's alarming is that they're saying no country is immune from it, and if you don't plan properly, it could provoke civil unrest.
That is something that we've covered many times here on Newzroom Afrika in the past year, 2022, as we saw interest rates rising and inflation being high on a runaway path. But it's no surprise that even this particular report confirms their predictions of 2022, because 2022 report said exactly what we're speaking about now in terms of what is going to happen in 2023 and in 2024, because they spoke about the divergent growth around the world, countries looking more inward in terms of not relying on other countries. I mean, we saw what happened with COVID-19 for 2 years, and as the world was coming back to normality, the Ukraine-Russia war started almost a year ago, and that led to this energy crisis in Europe, the global food crisis that we have now with feed and oil and other amenities that we've taken sort of for granted in terms of importing them. So what this report is actually talking about now is that there is indeed a path that countries around the world are going, looking inward, becoming self-sustaining, and not relying on other countries for their sustainability. And that's why the cost of living crisis is going to take more than 2 years, because these countries it's going to take some time for countries, for example, to build that capacity to be independent of many other countries. It's changing a lot of what is happening, and we've already seen it here at home, that the cost of living crisis is real, and it's going to continue for the next 2 years.
Indeed. And you were reading through that report as the experts were speaking there, and you were able to identify that a number of countries right now are under pressure. How many countries are we talking about, and what has happened in those countries?
The report is quite scary because it just, on the cost of living crisis, it takes one part of it, which is fuel. The rise in fuel prices, as we've seen here in South Africa, we're not immune, is something that has impacted us. I think there was even a march by the DA to the seat of government to appeal to them to do away with some of the many taxes that are there. So it has found that there have been 92 protests around the world, some of them quite severe, some of them very mild, like the DA's one, which is basically saying this is what we need to do, this is our memorandum. But in many countries they've become quite violent, and in just 1 year there's been 92 countries that have experienced these particular protests because of the rising fuel prices. Now, where the report also says that is not going to end anytime soon, the rise in fuel prices. But as you said in your first question, the point is the risk to those public disorder is quite high. And I remember last year where one of the world's leading insurance companies put South Africa at number 10 of the most vulnerable countries in the world that will face public distress and those disruptions that we've seen in many other countries.
And you've hit the nail on the head there, because I think there was definitely reference to the general state of the cost of living for people who simply cannot make ends meet, who then took advantage, full advantage, of that July civil unrest 2021. Now, that already, all of these things that are fleshed out in this global risks report, it's as if they were talking or watching us as things were unfolding. Let's talk about climate change. They are saying natural disasters and extreme weather conditions are occurring more frequently now. That's something that world leaders ought to sit up and worry.
Yes, they're saying floods, natural disasters, it's something, is the third biggest risk facing the world today. And this is something that we have to take seriously, because we saw the floods in April in KZN. We are not immune. It goes back to the point that we are not immune here in South Africa, in the southern tip of Africa. We're not immune in what is happening around the world, which is why we are part of this global drive to make sure that emissions come down and we have a better environment. But they are warning that the response to what is needed is now being whittled away. All the work that's been done by COP 26, 25, 24 is being whittled away because global cooperation is not taking place. So these things are not really good for not only South Africa, but for the rest of the world in the long run.
In fact, the one expert that was speaking on climate change, his opening words, or at least among his opening words, was what's scientifically necessary is politically expedient.
Yes. It's a scary thought, because we don't really think about the weather most of the time, but looking at what happened in KZN, the lives that were lost, and the infrastructure and the rebuilding that takes years, that just tells you that even in the parts of Eastern Cape as well. And the interesting part about this report on climate change is that it's not going to impact countries where there's severe weather conditions only, or there's extreme weather or flooding. If, for example, what they're talking about is the fact that with 40% of GDP output happening in KZN, in the port of Durban, we could not export. So the countries that are relying on us for those exports were impacted, but they did not face the floods. But we couldn't export because our port was impacted by the flooding. So the ripple effect is going to be felt wherever you are in the world, because we are interconnected.
Yeah. Xolani Mbanjwa, let's leave it there. I mean, we could have spoken about so many of these topics. Interest rates, for example.
Interest rates it's a big one, because 90% of central banks in the world have increased rates, and the end is not yet in sight, and that's quite an interesting topic, and I know I'm eating into your time, but even this month we are expecting a 50 basis point hike from the Reserve Bank, but we'll talk more about that closer to the time.
All right, that's Xolani Mbanjwa, our business editor, and digesting that global risks report that has just been unveiled or released by the World Economic Forum.